Hello and welcome. All right, hello and welcome. Welcome very much to the CPL Alumni Reunion. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Great. So my name is Katie Laidlaw. I am a 2010 graduate of the Business School and the Kennedy School. And more importantly, I'm a Zuckerman and George Fellow. It's a good start. And I currently serve as co-chair of the Alumni Council. On behalf of the Alumni Council, I want to welcome you here this evening. There are over 250 alumni, guests, as well as fellows here this weekend to bring everyone together, and we're so excited that you're here. I'd first like to start with some thank yous. This type of gathering would not be possible without the vision of David Gergen, Ambassador Wendy Sherman, Dana Bourne, as well as Barbara Best. Please join me in thanking them. I'd also like to ask the CPL staff to raise their hands, as well as the Alumni Reunion Planning Committee. Thank you so much. I think we all recognize how much effort, seen and unseen, goes into pulling together wonderfully thoughtful events like this, and so thank you very, very much for your hard work. The Alumni Council is a group of 15 members who serve as a connection point between the alumni community and CPL. If you could raise your hand if you're an Alumni Council member, great. Please feel free to come up to the Alumni Council members throughout the reunion, provide feedback, ask questions, give some candid thoughts on where and what you would like to see the alumni community be about. Please take us up on that this weekend. I'd like to talk for a few minutes about the alumni experience. What is it that CPL is hoping and trying to build for alumni? It's a couple of things. I think the first thing is that when you reach out to a fellow alum, that you're going to hear back from them. If you email or make that phone call, you know you're going to hear back. It's building that trust community that's really what helps build the fabric of an alumni community. The second is that this is a group of leaders who can challenge each other, ask questions, share thoughts across industries, geographies, and even ideologies. And the last is that this is a group of leaders who are interested in giving back to CPL and the Kennedy School. Now, what have been some of the types of alumni activities that have been going on? One of these is the alumni database. Raise your hand if you've downloaded the database to your phone. Yeah. By the end of the weekend, every hand will be able to be in the air. We're going to spend some time tomorrow and give you an opportunity to make sure it's on your phone. It is an incredible resource to find each other by name, geography, industry, fellowship, you name it. It is an incredible resource. The mentoring opportunities are also significant. If you're ever passing through Boston, if you don't live here today, reach out to CPL and see if they'd like to possibly connect you with fellows that would like to learn about you, your company, and your industry. There's also been a series of newsletters and webinars. Raise your hand if you've either opened a newsletter or attended a webinar. Yes, great. These have thus far included David Gergen providing commentary on the first 100 days of the current administration, or even reflections on the midterm elections. Looking to 2019, we're going to be looking to expand that by bringing in more professors across HKS, and honestly want to hear from you, the alum community, of what types of topics you'd like to discuss. There's also been the launch of the class captain effort. The class captains are meant to serve across all fellowships of a singular year. Please feel free to view this also as a person who can be a resource to you. Ask them questions, or also feel free to use the Google group to talk among or across your fellowships of your graduation year. And lastly, the alum community has taken through regional events. There have been CPL leadership and staff went on the road. They went to San Francisco, DC, New York, and Boston, and different types of events in each city. Again, piloting and testing what are the types of convening activities that alums would like to have. How do we build this community? What we hope for this weekend is a few things. First of all, it's to reconnect people who haven't seen each other in a while. It's to build new connections, and to frame all of this in remembering what is it that CPL is all about. How do we push and encourage each other to pursue or take risks in serving the public good? What does that mean for you? And feel free to ask people in an open and safe environment, recreate that Darman Room experience for yourself this weekend. Secondly, as part of that, it's to re-engage on your leadership learning journey. A lot of us, when we were here as students, we almost maybe took it for granted. We were able to do that every day. If you've graduated and been out for a few years, it's not quite as accessible. So this weekend, so much thought went into tomorrow's agenda to have intentional time to build connections as well as to learn from some of the professors and practitioners here at the Kennedy School. And the last opportunity is to introduce you to other ways, again, to give back and reconnect to CPL and HKS. Now, what's interesting about this weekend is CPL has invested in some high technology for us. One of those is that tomorrow, a lot of the morning is going to be live streamed. If you happen to hear from any alums who are unable to travel today, let them know that they can still join the session. And secondly, raise your hand if you've downloaded the Reunion app. Yeah. Thank you, Dave Calloway, who is leading the leaderboard. It is a competitive app, but it also has an agenda that can let you know where to go and where to be tomorrow. Lastly, in the vein of thinking about how you can give back to CPL, there was a unique fellowship started last spring by alums, and it's called the Gergen Fellowship. It's one way to say thank you to David Gergen for his pioneering efforts to launch CPL. We currently have had 202 alums donate in some way or kind or whatever level was comfortable to that fellowship. And what I want to encourage today is we're at 40% participation. How can we get that to over 50% by the new year? The benefits of this fellowship are to support and serve CPL and to benefit future students. So whatever level you're comfortable at, please feel free to consider that this weekend. Caitlin Donahue is from the development team, or feel free to ask any alumni council member who can share more about that fellowship. So more than anything, welcome back to CPL. I hope you all, or many of us, are appreciating this new building. It is incredible. And I look forward to tomorrow's agenda. And so I now hand it over to Mike Trejo, a Dubin Fellow.
Thank you, Katie. Hello, everyone. My name is Michael Trejo. I was a graduate of the business school and the Kennedy School, 2013, and a Dubin Fellow. And really happy to be here tonight. Want to walk you through a couple of things. And the first is, I'm really fired up about this gathering, about this conference, because we're doing things a little bit differently than we've done in the past. Knowing that this is an assortment of folks who are A, type A, and B, very cause-driven. We can't just have a gathering where all we do is hang out. We got to do something with it, right? Because there's so much momentum that comes out of 200 plus people showing up in one place that we had to do something with it. So we've come up with an idea. And we're out a little bit on a branch, but hopefully you'll join us. And this idea is a call to action. And the call to action is basically to say, we're all here together. We've come from different places, different professional interests, different geographies. But we all have a little bit of power in that if we can all agree to do something together, well, wouldn't that be powerful? And so if you look at this app that we've given you, this Whova app, and you go through and you look at the messages, all of you have received a message with a poll. And the poll asks you a question, which of these calls to action speak to you? There's 4. And we as the alumni committee came up with 4 that were broad enough but that were powerful enough that everybody, no matter what you're doing, can find some way to contribute. And so the 4 are, A, what are we doing about the next generation of leaders? What can we do to develop them? B, with that next generation of leaders, how do we get them more specifically civically engaged? C, and one of my personal favorites, I do have a favorite, is to bridge ideological divides. We're at a time when, people are divided on a number of issues, and are there ways that we can reach across an aisle and as leaders show people how to do that? And then lastly, fighting inequality, which, as I hear, seems to be the most popular one right now. But the idea is that you're going to vote on one of these 4 calls to action. And at the end of this conference tomorrow afternoon, we're going to tell you which one got the most votes. And then at that time, we're going to start making commitments. What can you do that is measurable, that is actionable in the next 6 to 12 months to make that cause come to light? So for example, let's say we were going to do bridging the ideological divide. And I work in renewables, and there are some people who think climate change is a thing and some people who don't. Well, I can sit there and say I'm right and everyone else is wrong and we have to figure out how it's going to be. Or sometime in the next 6 to 12 months, I could do something like, maybe I'll write an op-ed. Or maybe I'll get together with one of my colleagues who works in the oil and gas industry and say, hey, let's get some people together. Let's go to a place like Houston. Let's go to a place like Midland. Let's go to a place like Oklahoma City. And let's have a discussion. Let's have a policy dialogue. Let's get somebody from the CPL faculty engaged. Let's find some alumni in the area. Let's get together. And that's what we want to do. And we have the structure in place to enforce this. So we've been very thoughtful, very intentional about this. We have a follow-up, literally a committee of folks who are focused on follow-up, who for the next 6 months after this gathering are going to be looking to see are people living up to the commitments they made. Because we want to do these things. We want to be able to say, not only are we here to network, not only are we here to get together, we're also here to make the world a little bit of a better place. And that's what we're going to do. So please take a look at the app, download it if you have not yet, go into the poll, think about which call to action speaks to you, and then as we go through the course of the conference, so the dinners tonight, the sessions tomorrow, the brain trust, the dream trust sessions and so forth, think about what it is you can do, and then at the end we'll come to an agreement and we'll start doing those things. So very, very, very excited to do that. All right. So now I'm going to give up the stage, and I'm going to introduce you to 2 people who are going to go through a session here. The first person you know very well, right? He's a man who has founded the center, who, every time I see him on TV, I feel like a little sense of ownership, like you see one of your family members at a basketball game, like, oh yeah, they're right there. But you also know him very personally because he's been at the retreats, he's been around the center, and we got to know him very well. And also to introduce you to a woman that I hope you get to know very well, because she brings a very, very impressive resume of things that she's done in her career, but also a very real, a very authentic, a very powerful presence in all the rooms. I was able to meet her today. So I'm gonna get off the stage and I'm going to allow CPL Director David Gergen and incoming Director Ambassador Wendy Sherman. Please come to the stage.
We come with wine.
Yeah, we come. Good evening. Good evening. It's wonderful to see all of you here, over 200 people. Wow, I'm very impressed. And we will, knowing your standing, we are going to cut to the chase pretty quickly. We'll talk here for maybe 20 minutes or so and then turn to you. I wanted to first just tell you that many of you may know that this past year, one of our alums, Dan Fian, ran for Congress in Minnesota and won the primary in a very tough race. Then he faced an extremely uphill fight, and he came this close in the end. I think he's going to run again, and he's going to burst through. But what I want to tell you is that while he was in Minnesota, of the 10 people who were the Dubin fellows with him in his cohort, 6 of them went to Minnesota to help him. 6 of them went to Minnesota to help him. I think that speaks so clearly about the commitment that many of you have to each other and the commitment you have to the common good, to change, to breaking the status quo. That's so important. And we're proud of what you're doing. We're proud of many of you in the arena, the way you've committed yourselves. And just keep going. And I think that the ideas that Michael's given you, the ideas that Katie just gave you, can be enormously powerful rockets for you as you go forward. I could talk hours about what's going on here. I think just being in this room, you can tell how rapidly the school is changing and changing for the better. And I might say that it's because of you that we have benefactors who are willing to make these changes in the school, to invest in the school, to invest in you. We have now 10 fellowship programs, 118 students involved. We have, for the last couple of years, been trying very hard to get renewals on those fellowship programs. We have 10. At the moment, we now have 7 firm renewals signed and sealed. We have 2 more verbal commitments and only 1 program outstanding. And we're just creating a new 11th fellowship program, the Black Family Fellowship Program, which will bring 25 veterans to Harvard each year. Most of them will be coming to the Kennedy School, but there'll also be veterans who'll be going to the law school and the business school. So CPL is on the march. We're well poised for the future. And we have now the single most important element here within our community. We have our new leadership in place. And we have tremendous leaders coming in, led by Wendy Sherman. Michael just talked about, well, you turn on CNN. Let me tell you something. You can turn on MSNBC and you'll see Ambassador Sherman. It'll be hard to judge which network is more liberal than the other one. That may be true. But I just want to tell you, I'm on contract there, and she's on contract there. She has a longer contract. So I think that speaks well, and you should just know how thrilled I am that she is going to be arriving in January. As we were talking today, we were commenting on the fact that this has been a seamless transition. We believe we share the same values. We care about many of the same things. We look at the world in much the same way. And by the way, we have enormous respect for each other. And that's very, very important. Wendy and I, she reminded me, we first met on a television, program with Neil Lehrer years ago.
Yeah, long ago.
We did some Friday nights together. And it's delightful to have her back. I'm going to ask her a few questions about her life. And then she's going to ask me a few questions, and we're going to turn to you, okay? So, Wendy, you're known as the woman who brought home the nuclear agreement with Iran, a big breakthrough in international diplomacy, celebrated almost everywhere around the world except in our own country at the moment. But nonetheless, very important. But what has been really interesting, I had not known just how strong a background you had in domestic affairs before you became international. Tell us about that, for starters, so people can know more about you.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm completely blown away by the number of you in this room. It says to me in volumes that are almost unspeakable how deep your commitment is to CPL, but even more, how meaningful your time here at the Center for Public Leadership at HKS was. You don't see people come back for reunions unless they feel that connection, not only to the school, but to each other. And so what folks were talking to about ways to network, ways to further invest in what you're doing as a reunion network, I completely applaud. And David and I had an opportunity today, along with Dana and Barbara, to talk with the board of the Alumni Reunion and the Alumni Council. And you all are incredibly valuable to each other to help each other climb those ladders. You're incredibly valuable to students here who really, really, really need you as a mentor and as someone to help them know how to go the next place. More and more, as we heard with the David Gergen Fellow, you are donors, which is really important. It's a way to give back. You're just extraordinary. And then finally, one of the things we talked about today was, and it gets back to the domestic issues, meeting in communities around the country as cohorts, as groups, and talking with people in our country. There's a desperate need for us to not just talk with each other, but to listen to each other. And that is what leadership is about. So you can take your leadership skills into local communities and help get this conversation started, which is so desperately needed in our country. So what David's referring to is I've got a really strange background. I tell everybody, and I say the same to you, I wish you an unexpected life, because mine certainly has been. My training is as a social worker. I have a master's in social work and community organizing and clinical skills. I only half joke those clinical skills are amazingly helpful with dictators and members of Congress. So I went from being director of child welfare in Maryland to meeting another Marylander who I didn't know at the time, Barbara Mikulski, going to work as her chief of staff, ultimately running her first successful campaign to be the first woman Democratic senator to be elected to the U.S. Senate in her own right, someone who wasn't a widow. I then went on to do a lot of presidential politics. I was a partner in a Democratic media consulting firm making television ads. And I got a call, would I come and meet Warren Christopher, who was going to be Bill Clinton's first Secretary of State. And I couldn't imagine why the hell Warren Christopher wanted to talk to me. But I went because you should never turn down an opportunity for something unexpected. And so I met with Chris, and the upshot of that is that I got confirmed as the Assistant Secretary for Legislative Affairs because I knew Washington really well, even though I didn't know everything there was to know about national security and foreign policy, and Chris knew that, I told him that. And I have done national security and foreign policy ever since, both in the public sector, then as Madeleine Albright's counselor, as Hillary Clinton and John Kerry's Undersecretary for Political Affairs, the first woman to ever hold that job. It took us till 2011 for a woman to have that job. And Madeleine and I and some other great people like Carol Browner, Susie George, Jim O'Brien, built a business consulting firm. So I'm a businesswoman as well. I still am today. And so I wish you an unexpected life. I have had a great one, and now I have another fantastically unexpected chapter, sort of born by Graham Allison, picked up by David Gergen, affirmed by the dean and the search committee, and now I'm all yours.
So it's so interesting. You know, I had the chance to work in 4 White Houses, and you worked in 4 State Departments.
Yes.
And I'm just curious, you had these 4 secretaries. You had Warren Christopher, and then you had Madeleine and Hillary and then John Kerry. Striking personality. So tell me, did you have some big leadership lessons that came out of working for those and watching them be, you know, you were there in critical positions for each one of those?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think timing is quite critical in life, and sometimes you can't imagine what that will be. And I think they were all the right secretaries of state for their time. Mm-hmm. Leadership is also about matching talent to the mission. And so when Bill Clinton became president, he hadn't done much in national security and foreign policy. He'd been the governor of the state of Arkansas. And so he wanted someone who was an eminence grise, and that was Warren Christopher. He'd been Deputy Secretary of State. He'd been head of the search committee for Bill Clinton, of the transition. He was not going to get Bill Clinton in trouble. He knew the ropes and...
That kind of trouble.
Huh?
That kind of trouble.
Right, that kind of trouble,
Yeah.
indeed,
Right.
not that kind of trouble. So he was perfect. Then, for the second term, when a president can take more risks than you can in a first term, which you well understand, Clinton made a historic decision. He made Madeleine Albright the first woman Secretary of State in the United States of America. And a quick funny story about that, she was on the list, but there was a most people thought Dick Holbrooke was going to become Secretary of State, may he rest in peace. There was a Washington Post article with some really stupid guy in the White House, I must say. We never know who it is, and we don't want to know who it is. Said, well, Madeleine Albright is second tier. No. Yes. And it made us all crazy. So we organized, including calling the First Lady of the United States and Al Gore and a few other well-placed phone calls. And that led to Madeleine Albright being secretary. We shamed them into it, indeed.
Leadership by another means.
But she was a great secretary of state because she was willing to take risks. She was a fantastic person to communicate to the American people what foreign policy was about. She was a refugee, so she had a lot of standing in the world. She was European. And then Hillary, of course, after George Bush 43 and the Iraq War, when the world had decided they didn't like America very much anymore, President Obama picked Hillary because she knew everybody in the world. And in one phone call, she could say, "We're back. I'm here for you." And everybody would take her call. And then again, second term, Obama turned to John Kerry, who was a very activist, Energizer Bunny kind of Secretary of State who will go anywhere and do anything. And I think every leader has to be married to the mission of the time. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you had that experience with presidents.
Some of my presidents were not as well matched at the time as others.
We can go back and forth. Tell me about your
I worked for Richard Nixon. He would probably fit in very well with Machiavelli.
How would you compare Nixon to the current president?
Do we really want to go there? I will be very briefly. Nixon had actually read the Constitution, and he believed in law and order for most people, not himself. They did share a view that the president has basically almost unlimited powers, and I think that's been a mistake on both parts. And it's particularly dangerous today, as we have in many countries around the world, a drift toward authoritarianism. That's particularly true in Europe. And we have to be on guard. We have to be ever vigilant here about protecting our democracy. And it does seem to me that if I had to put number 5 on your list of 4, it would be about the protection and the strengthening of our own democracy. Because that's fundamentally, for those of us who are Americans, it's pretty fundamental. But even for those students from overseas, it matters whether America is both stable and principled and strong. Richard Nixon, I think that Richard Nixon sort of had he had his crooked side to him, and he had a few people around him who were willing to carry that out. In the current administration, there's almost a sense of a mob. It's almost a sense of a pervasive thing in the culture. I worked two doors down the hall from John Dean and had no clue until it was almost over.
Whoa.
What was going on there? It was like a criminal enterprise 2 doors away, right? But it wasn't pervasive. There wasn't any sense that
it wasn't a norm that went through the entire place.
And I felt when Watergate came to an end, I was still just leaving. I went to work for Jerry Ford, but nonetheless
timing is everything.
It was a real change of pace. But I don't know. I felt that it was that for many of us that political life was over. It's like the Chicago Black Sox. Remember, they threw the World Series and they were banned from baseball after that. And I thought we would all be banned. But America is a very forgiving country in many ways. And what was stunning was how many people went on from there, had worked there in one way or another, to become really substantial public servants. And so it really showed. I mean, the people like George Shultz and the Kissingers of the world and others who came out of that, or Jim Baker, I was trying to remember exactly when I guess he came in during the Ford period. But there were, Elliot Richardson survived that. There were a lot of people who came out of that okay. In this case, Dina Powell is one person who's come out well out of this administration.
I'd say Nikki Haley came out well.
And Kelly,
Nikki Haley. Mm-hmm.
But not very many have done that, and that's sadness. It's a sadness. It's not, at first I was angry, but now I'm sad.
So, David, of all of the leaders with whom you have worked, and you've been one yourself, what do you think is the most important quality for a leader? When you've looked at the folks that you've worked with and you've said, boy, they did really well. What did it take?
Moral purpose, I think, is more important perhaps than anything else. Of course, good character matters, but I think the issue that is at hand is whether the enterprise itself, you're leading the group, and every organization needs a moral purpose at its core. And I think the task of leadership is to try to fulfill that, to make that your aspiration, and try to form a consensus behind you and build followers. It's not enough to appeal just to your base if you're president. That is what you need to bring in are people who are not in your base. You need to build a consensus within a nation. Otherwise, one of the things, most dangerous trends in Washington is when big initiatives have been put forward by the last two presidents, by Obama and now by Trump. The big initiatives in Obama's case were health care and Iran. And in both cases, he got majorities, but he got 0 Republican votes.
Yes.
And now Trump comes along, gets his tax plan done, he gets 0 Democratic votes. And what that just produces an instability in our policies, and nobody around the world can rely on us for our leadership.
So let me ask you one more question about leadership, and then we'll take a few minutes to ask any questions that anybody here has, and then let you get off to your dinners. You've done an enormous amount at CPL. When you think about what you hope, we're not burying you yet, no funeral for you.
I'm so vertical.
You're very vertical, and I want you all to know David is going to be intensely involved in CPL going forward. We're going to give him time to write and think, which will be great for all of us, but he's going to be very engaged. Because I'd be an idiot not to engage him. But when you think of all of the things, tell me what you're really proud about and what you hope gets sustained.
I'm very proud that together, and this is very much about a community, about a team, together we've created something new, a new community coming out of the Kennedy School. I think that the fellowships have helped to draw to these programs many of the most talented students who come to the school. People have had enormous accomplishments just in the 2 or 3 years since leaving. And that is very proud. But more importantly, there is a spirit that Michael spoke to about wanting to make the world a better place. And, I must tell you that I came to Cambridge somewhat disillusioned with the baby boom generation. And I'm a preemie in that generation. But I felt we just hadn't accomplished what I had hoped, that there was a sense that we were part of the quagmire. But I think your generation holds enormous promise. You remind me so much of the World War II generation, which was, sacrificed for the country overseas and then came back and rebuilt America at home. And I see that promise in so many of you. My biggest satisfaction and the biggest hope I have is that your generation takes hold, that those of us who are older need to finish what we can, and then we need to get the hell off the stage and give the stage to you, because I think the country will be in good hands. I think the world will be in better hands. And I think my purpose now is to help you in any way I can. And Wendy's going to be running the ship. We've got Cornell Brooks from the NAACP, who ran the NAACP, is coming in, joining our faculty. We have Arthur Brooks, who's coming in from running
We now call them the Brooks Brothers.
The Brooks Brothers. Yeah, and Arthur has been running the American Enterprise Institute for 10 years. He's a principled conservative. We need that at the school. It's important we have someone who believes in leadership from that perspective. We need to learn how to talk to each other across chasms. And I think he will help us do that. So we've got a great team coming in at the faculty side. And Wendy is just the perfect person to run all of this. But the future really belongs to you all. It really belongs to you, but we have enormous faith in you. I'm hoping to devote more of my time to the alumni because I've worked with a number of you in the past. But I just think that the next 10 or 15 years, you're going to move right in there and start driving a lot of institutions in this country, and that's going to be a great day for the country and for the world.
Couldn't agree more. So, those of you who are the leaders of today and the leaders of tomorrow, any question is fair game about anything, if you have any.
No.
Anybody?
The bar's still open, too.
Yes, that too. Anyone? Monet has a microphone. I don't know if anybody else does. And microphone over here. Anything you want to ask or say? Are you? Huh? Okay.
Go, Colleen.
Hi,
Hi. You have to tell
Hello
us
there.
who you are.
it's the same forum rules again. I'm Colleen Gross-Ebinger, 2007 grad. I was a Reynolds Fellow. And woohoo! I think we are the second highest representing fellowship here tonight, so we can do an extra. Woot woot. I just welcome.
No competition among you.
No, not competitive at all.
Uh-huh.
So welcome, Ambassador Sherman. We're really excited to have you
Thank
here.
you.
And I am just curious, what made you say yes to taking this position, and what are you most excited about?
Thank you for the question. I took the position for a lot of the reasons that David just spoke to. There is an incredible need for purposeful leadership. And that is in all sectors, at all levels of our society. We are at a very difficult moment, not just in the United States, but all over the world. We talked about rising, you okay? That's the kind of thing I would do, just to let you know. Rising nationalism and populism, and it's because there is an enormous disparity between the rich and the poor. There is a real anxiety about modernity. There's an anxiety about communities not looking different than when older people grew up, and that makes them anxious and wondering what their place is in the world. And we don't have the leadership throughout the world to help people bridge that change, that divide, to put policies in place to make that better. And with artificial intelligence coming, which you all are going to understand and I never fully will, it's going to be even more difficult. There are going to be people who are left out and left behind. There are going to be greater divides among us. And we need really, really smart, purposeful leadership with moral vision that doesn't forget that at the end of the day, if we don't have values that go with that leadership, it's a hollow action. It won't get us where we need to get. And so I look at where that's being discussed, where those future leaders are being developed and affirmed and encouraged. And for me, that's the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard. I think it is absolutely essential, as I said earlier today, because you all are so privileged. You may not have come into Harvard privileged, but you are privileged having been a graduate of Harvard, that we make sure, as Larry Bacow has said, we are not the 1% for the 1%. And so the leadership of which I speak means reaching out, having the conversations, listening to different points of view, trying to understand why people are afraid, why they have fear. That doesn't mean that we have to endorse misogyny, anti-Semitism, racism, homophobism, any of that. But it does mean we need to understand where that comes from and whether we can bridge those divides. You are the people who can do that. Your responsibility is to help the young people that are here, encourage other young people to come, take what you've learned about leadership out into the community to people who will never get a chance to have the education that you did. So I'm thrilled at the opportunity, at the challenge. There's so many resources here. It's fantastic, so I'm very privileged. And I get to work with this guy over here, David Gergen, which is a pleasure and a thrill, and I'll learn things from him too. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, a real privilege to be here. Peter Howard, and I was 2007 Reynolds Fellow. And thank you, another Reynolds Fellow. This question is for David. You know, in the last week, we've seen the Bush memorial service.
Yep.
And we've heard a lot of discussion around, I guess, borrowing David Brooks' phrase, the eulogy virtues versus the resume virtues.
Good for you. Okay.
So I guess my question for you is, as you continue to support the Center for Public Leadership, but as you step into a new role, what are some of the eulogy virtues you would like to see carried forth and fostered going forward?
That's a good question. As the George Bush services went forward this past week, and they really recall for us values that almost seem part of a vanishing world. That he represented traditions that stretch back to the late 19th century, early 20th century. Impressive that he comes from a family of leaders over generations. His father, Prescott Bush, who had enormous influence on him, there was a vacancy in Connecticut in the U.S. Senate, and he went to Washington in the 1950s and then was elected to the Senate in his own right. And he became very close to Dwight Eisenhower, who was then president. And Eisenhower almost dumped Richard Nixon in 1956 to put Prescott Bush on the ticket. He stuck with Nixon, as it turned out, but Prescott Bush's son went on to go to the White House, and then his grandson went on to the White House, and now he has a great-grandson who is in public service. So there is this view of service. In their case, it was a sense of noblesse oblige. They were very privileged. They did come from the top 1.1% of the 1%. But nonetheless, they gave back. And part of that was also he was heavily shaped by World War II, his World War II experiences. And John Meacham, in that eloquent tribute and his eulogy, which I thought was the best of the eulogies, and I've just become a huge John Meacham fan. He's got a book out on the soul of America that if you really ought to read if you're interested in these kind of issues. But he points out that when Bush was shot down, 18, the youngest pilot shot down in the Pacific, and his two crew members who managed to parachute out first got out first he was the last one to jump as a pilot, but they died. And he was very fortunate. A U.S. submarine found him in the water a few hours later. Otherwise, he would have perished. But he always asked himself thereafter, "Why was I spared? Why was I spared?" It's a refrain you hear from many soldiers who come back from Vietnam, Korea, World War II, and the like. And he spent the rest of his life trying to, in effect, seek salvation for why he was spared. And I think that was true of many of the World War II veterans. They had a sense of, they truly believed in putting country first. When I came to Washington, there were strong Democrats, there were strong Republicans, but people there, this was in the early 70s, thought of themselves as first and foremost strong Americans. They had, you had a Saltonstall from Massachusetts saluting a Polish kid from Brooklyn. And it democratized the country in many ways. And the virtues of loyalty, of patriotism, of caring, of empathy, I think he represented all those. I must tell you one other thing, though. One of the things I really enjoyed about that generation is they also had a great sense of humor. Leadership was an adventure. And they enjoyed laughing with each other. They had a great sense of irony. I remember so well when George Bush Sr. was in the presidency, when they sent the U.S. troops into Kuwait to kick Saddam out, his popularity ratings went up to 91%. And he would look like a sure thing to become the next president. There would be reelected. But in the 18 months that followed, his popularity went down by 60 points. He went from 91 to 31, lost the election, stunned and hurt, emotionally very damaged, hurt. But that generation was also resilient. And I remember hearing him about 3 months after he left office. I was in a small group, and he talked about since he left the White House, he had jumped out of an airplane Remember that? He was one of those times he parachuted out, which is what he'd done in the Second World War. He wanted to do it better this time. And he told the group, as he landed and he was taking off his parachute, trying to get out from under a tangle of ropes and one thing and another, Barbara stalked over to him and said, "George, I haven't seen anybody fall that far, that fast since you last ran for president." So I like that about those folks. I miss their humor, and I miss their sense of what the world is. I'm just telling you, you guys can do it. You can recreate. You're the closest to World War II generation I've seen since.
Any others?
Yeah.
Yes. Right here.
Hi. There may be someone else who wants to ask a question. I just wanted to sort of...
You have to tell us who you are first.
I will. My name's Charles Segundo. I was class of 2008, George Fellow, and a co-alum in the same kind of class as Maura Sullivan. I don't know if she's here this evening.
Maura Sullivan was here earlier today.
Who has done a lot of impressive stuff as a public servant since graduating. And in fact, she and I had a conversation as I walked into the cemetery in Normandy, where many, many Americans lie, as part of a trip that I took earlier last year with my family. And I called to mind, as I was speaking to her, some of the comments that you had made about the great generation, the World War II generation that had sacrificed so much for this country, but also for the values that this country obviously holds dear. And so that was a great CPL moment, but I just wanted to kind of press you on the notion that the current generation, or this generation of folks in the room here, are close to that generation, because I don't see this kind of sense of collective sacrifice on anything like the same scale as that of my grandfather, who was also involved in D-Day. So just wanted to kind of hear you elaborate a bit more, because I think it's a very bold claim. It's one that I would love to believe, but I just sort of love to hear you talk about it a bit more.
If those of you who have not been to Normandy and been there and seen Pointe du Hoc, you should go, and you don't get a sense of how a massive sacrifice. I went there with President Reagan for the 40th anniversary, and then President Clinton for the 50th anniversary of D-Day. And I remember Reagan gave this talk up at the top of Point. There's these sheer cliffs that soldiers had to go up, climbing up on a rope, pulling themselves up as the Germans were right above them with machine guns firing down at them, and how many went down. And up there with Reagan were the survivors, the boys of Pointe du Hoc, as he called them. And it's very moving. And I agree with you. This generation, fortunately, has not been called upon to make those kind of massive sacrifices. And thank goodness that they haven't been. But what I do believe is there is an idealism in the generation. There's much more. Look, I don't want to say this about all the generations. The millennial generation is the biggest generation in American history. And there are a lot of folks in that generation who are in trouble. There are a lot of them, too many have opioids, too many have had prison periods. There are a lot of other issues in this generation that we ought to be addressing much more forcefully than we are. But I think that those of you in the room represent a portion of that generation, which I find extremely promising, wanting to volunteer, getting in the arena. Women are coming in and streaming in. Wendy used to work at Emily's List. She was director of Emily's List for a while. And 2 years ago, 1,000 women called Emily's List to get help in running for office. This time around, 39,000 women called Emily's List. That's just new. That is a really big change in our politics. And if you want to see the people up close who represent that generation in a much more connective way, go around and talk to the veterans who've been running for office after coming out of the Kennedy School, or been there's been a collective effort to get people elected out of this generation. And I don't know, Ry Barcott is here tonight, but Seth Moulton and Dan Feehan and Maura Sullivan. There's a woman named Emily Cherniak. We've made an honorary member of your class, and who runs New Politics. And I can just tell you how many people. I did a dozen fundraisers this fall for veterans who are running for office. And they went to spectrum of a lot of Harvard people, but a lot of other young people and they're really wonderful. This woman, Mikey Sherrill, who comes out of New Jersey, she's going to be a future leader. You look at the woman out in Kentucky, Amy McGrath. There are a lot of women in that group of veterans, and they'll knock your socks off with the qualities you'll see. And if you don't think you're seeing the World War II generation, look again. They represent a kind of valor that we haven't seen in a long time. But look at Seth. He had 3 tours in Iraq. He was done. He was coming here to the county school. He was going to go to the business school. He was done. And Petraeus called him and said, I've been ordered by the president to be in charge of the surge. Would you get, Seth was a Marine infantry officer. And he said, would you please come back and help me and take a 4th tour? He didn't have to do that. But he went back there, and he was not in the green zone. He was in really dangerous territory. But he did that. He volunteered. He sacrificed for that. Now, he's got some other controversies going on right now about the leadership in the House. And he's going through a rough period right now. But I'm just telling you, he put his life on the line for this country very, very willingly.
Let me say, I think, so we can let you all nibble a little bit more and then go off to your dinners. This is really the challenge to you. And David's right about those of us who are older ultimately have to get off the stage. I came of political age in the late 60s during an incredibly violent time and a divided time in this country. 5 assassinations, John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy, Medgar Evers, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X.
And those 3 guys from Mississippi.
Right. And anyone who went to Mississippi to try to register workers and register people to vote might end up dead, as these 3 did. Kent State, where students were shot, bombs in New York townhouses by the weathermen. I left Smith College to go to Boston University in part because I wanted to protest every week. And Smith was way too quiet. And we were a generation that decided we'd had enough and that we had to do something about it. And it was even a generation who didn't want to go to war, who wanted to end a war. It was a violent, horrible time, as horrible as the time we are in now, in my view. But out of that horrible time, not only came the end of the Vietnam War, and in my view, some patriots like Daniel Ellsberg who were willing to pay the price of releasing the Pentagon Papers by going to jail, because he thought it was so important to our security. But we got the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the women's movement, and yes, we went on to some controversies, including Watergate. But it was a crucial time in American history where young people rose up and decided things needed to change. And Lyndon Johnson read the African American community and knew what the future was, even though he'd grown up in the most racist community. So I think the challenge we're laying out to all of you in this room, given the skill sets you have, the opportunities you've had, the understanding of leadership that you have, like those Parkland kids and the kids in Chicago who have to face violent death every single day, to speak out, to speak up, to lead your communities, to lead our country, to lead the world, to get past this very difficult time. And that really is the challenge to you, and the fantastic goodness that you all have turned out for this alumni reunion, because you want to continue that value set and reinforce that with each other and affirm that with each other. And I salute you for doing that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, guys. I think we'll have it all.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay.